Okay, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to sharing a quick snippet of how to design learning experiences with developmental science in mind. So as you shared, I've worked now for about 20 years creating learning programs in schools and running a school called Millennium School in San Francisco. And the whole premise of our work is to build around human development. So in this quick 5 minutes, I hope to introduce to you two very brief frameworks to think about how to design with development in mind. Background for us was we wanted to create a middle school, so roughly ages to 11 to 14. And we knew that, at least in the US context, these were seen as the worst years, possibly of life, certainly of the education system. So we wanted to understand why it was going so badly and how to design something that created less conflict and that tapped into the potential of this age. And our very first thought was, if we're thinking only about academic standards or how to prepare for the next level, we've kind of already lost. We're right on the same battlefield that everyone else is. So instead, we spent 3 years going into the research around human development. And what we came to was this concept that there are, for adolescents, 3 developmental needs and 3 developmental stages. And I'll explain briefly what these are and give you some examples of how we designed our program around them. So first, the 3 developmental needs. So when you look at the neuroscience and the psychology of what's going on in adolescent minds and hearts, we came to these same 3 needs again and again. It's the need for identity, to discover who they are authentically in this social world, a need for connection, and then finally a need for contribution, to feel like they are doing things that are clearly valuable, that other people, objective people, recognize as valuable. So we simplified this to, we just say, personal, social, and real world. We call this our learning loop. Everything about our school, everything about even one class period is designed to touch on each of these 3 points in the loop. First, we make it personal. How does this affect my identity, or what do I know about my identity? Then we make it social. Then we bring it to the real world. So to give you one brief example, one day I walked into one of our project-based classes being taught by an amazing teacher named Simon, and he began the class with a prompt for reflection. And every student was asked to think about, what is a time when I was sure I was right, but I turned out to be wrong? And so they thought about this for a while, and then he asked them to share it. And so that was going from the personal to the social. They started to share these different experiences and realize how it's possible to be so certain and then so mistaken. And then he made a leap and brought it to a real world question and said, we're going to study conflict in the Middle East. And we're going to learn about people and cultures where everyone is sure they are right. But they can't all be right. And we're going to have to find ways to get past some of those beliefs. And so in even just 10 minutes at the beginning of a class, he had done one full cycle from the personal to the social to the real world. And over the course of that next hour and over that next semester, it would continue going through that cycle and of picking up some energy at each point. So those are 3 developmental needs, very briefly expressed. The other part of our work is to understand developmental stages. And here we're trying to look for a deeper set of standards, not simply academic or content standards, but how do we tap into human potential as people are growing through adolescence? So again, here we consolidated a number of different theories, worked with psychologists and neuroscientists. And the essence we came to was most adolescents begin at the stage of belonging. That first they need to feel safe where they are in this school community. And so that expressed for us by starting the year with a wilderness experience where they were not having to worry about academics. They were not in a school building. They were in a small group of peers that they would be with for years to come. After the belonging stage, they move into what we call achievement stage. That means they've become more scientific thinkers. They've started to feel confident that they socially are welcome. And they're wanting to show that they can be excellent, wanting to create things that are valuable to others. That might be accomplishments in sports, in academics, socially, etc. And then at some point, adolescents start to question, why am I working for others? Why am I working for grades? What's really meaningful about this? And that's the gateway into this third stage that we call authenticity. And that's a stage where you know how to belong and you know how to achieve, but you're not simply playing someone else's game. You're confident enough that you can bring something that is unique to you to a community around you. And so our goal when we think about school is to help students move through these three stages. First, to feel solid with belonging, and kind of like tree rings growing out to achievement, and then to authenticity. And we return to this again and again when we're, particularly if we're stressed or worried about an academic goal or a pressure from the outside world, we want to make sure that we're honoring this foundation first. So present those two frameworks to you in the hopes it's helpful for the design work you're doing. And thank you again for having me.
Maybe I can ask you some follow-up questions and we can see if we can use some of that as well, no? Because I guess the way you explained this, no, sounded like, okay, you had a real clear vision of where you wanted to go. You mentioned before, no, that, okay, there was still the academic context, but you really took a strong stance at making this a strong priority, no? Now, what do you think if you try to apply, if you had a normal school, say, no, and you wanted to apply that developmental approach that you've implemented, what do you think would be the main obstacles that people would encounter, and how could they potentially navigate them?
Yeah, I think the key challenge would be the mistaken idea that if you take time away from academics to work on these more social emotional topics, that you're losing academic progress. And I think that if it's done well, quite the reverse should happen. You know, for example, if a child doesn't feel that they really belong, that's not secure, they are not in a position to learn anywhere close to their capacity. So I think investing in, for example, an advisory program and really putting time into that, so teachers feel supported and equipped, that advisory can have adventures together, whether a wilderness day or a field trip, things that bond them as a group. If a child then feels like, I am unconditionally accepted in this group, that is a wonderful beginning for their academic work. It allows them to kind of reduce their anxiety and feel like, I can show up here, I can take some risks with my academics instead of hiding or copying. So just as one example, that I think these two goals are really not in opposition at all.
Excellent. And then you mentioned that last development stage, which is the authenticity, no? Which I guess, if you want to imagine that in how you're living your learning experience, is probably the moment where you would want to have a maximum degree of freedom and learner agency, because
Precisely.
If they have to live by their authenticity, that's what they need, right? They need to have these degrees of freedom in maybe what kind of goals, projects, topics, content they're pursuing. So is that how would you go after this? Once again, if you feel that you are at the same time trapped by the intense curriculum, right?
Yeah. So there, I think the ideal is to see that even within an academic context, there are multiple solution paths. So if you framed your academic topic broadly enough, which I think any topic can be framed that way by couching it in a real world issue, you know, how do we address climate change, homelessness, etc., then you can weave in, say, elements of history or writing that needs to be done, but still preserve freedom. Say, it's up to you to reflect on this and choose a path that you want to present. You're going to control that, or in a team, you'll control that. But these milestones of, you know, presenting work, having feedback on it, will still be there. So we'll still meet our academic goals.
Brilliant. So I'm going to ask a follow-up question, which we don't have to put on record, but now I take you my extreme case, no, of my son. Actually, two of my sons are pretty similar, who would probably say that their authentic them is probably being an anime personality in a Japanese manga, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, does this apply to any young person's imagination and goal and strive for authenticity? I mean, can you build a good learning path around any aspirations, so to say?
Yeah. Well, I think a fundamental ingredient of a great school is a culture of freedom of identity.
Mhm.
And part of that freedom of identity is adults accepting and expecting lots of experiments to happen. So, this month or this year, you could be obsessed with manga, and we can enjoy that and work with that. And also we expect that it could completely change, or that could remain your lifelong passion. And 20 years later, you're living in Japan producing manga. Who knows? So I think the way that adults take it seriously, but also hold it lightly, these identity experiments really matters. And to know that the goal is not to figure out who you are, but it's to have the space to keep asking that question, keep generating answers, keep testing, keep generating new answers. That's the hallmark, I think, of a great educational space.
Brilliant. Okay, so I have to do another question because it's just so
Please.
interesting. So now, of course, we have this classical approach of, so then you get to the question of the role of the teachers, no? And the ability of the teachers to jump on this train of, yeah, being a proper coach, if you want, for these developmental stages. Now, that's quite a stretch, I guess, compared to maybe where some teachers are coming from in how they've been trained and how they've been used to handling the classroom. So how have you addressed this aspect of teacher development?
Yeah, it is an immense leap from instructor to facilitator, where you recognize our greatest gift is not to convey information to them. We'll be outcompeted by that increasingly, by other things in technology, but our ability to be facilitators and coaches is the magic. And if we're going to do that, we have to first experience it for ourselves. So if a school has the freedom to do this, I recommend creating adult advisory spaces where we receive coaching and do the same work that we're inviting students to do, of building our skills for mindfulness, for authenticity, for being comfortable being ourselves, breaking down some of the barriers between personal me and professional me. I think adolescents need to see that. They're differentiating from their parents, they're stepping away, they're looking for other adults who are models. If the other adults they see are teachers who are just trying to act like professionals with distance and formality, then they're not really effective models. So if we want to convey that, we have to be more real. And that's a huge gift to us as the educators, because it lets us come more alive, be more quirky and unique. And I think that for middle schoolers in particular, they connect with that quirkiness quite well. It'll lead to better relationships between faculty and students.
Excellent. Now, putting the string from one to the next. Now you mentioned the parents briefly, and I guess that's the other factor in the equation. Parents with a traditional view of school, which all of a sudden see the teachers, instead of working with them hard to get their good grades at the end of the year, making or outing in the wilderness, or tell me what. Then again, you might be a school that already has this image or this positioning, and you might have been chosen by parents who already subscribe to this. But what, again, if you tried this in a normal school, or a school that has mostly established itself by its academic performance standards, wouldn't you have to also deal with some of this parents' existing paradigm of a school and get them on board? Right?
Yeah, two things I'd say. One is that I think you can make a very confident argument that this is the future of academics. That if we're teaching them to memorize facts, we are not preparing them well for even today's world, let alone what they'll enter. And this ability to manage yourself and have complex and multiple problem solving or multiple solution skills is very, very useful in the world they're entering. So this is advanced academics. This is deeper learning. They don't have to forego academic excellence in order to be whole people. So that's one thing I'd say. The second is to invite the parents into the experience. So particularly, I'm speaking here to parents of adolescents. many parents experience profound fear and anxiety when they see their kids enter puberty and start to head toward adulthood. We, when we're parents of young children, we get a lot of developmental guidance about what to expect. Otherwise, we'd go crazy with our 2-year-olds. But when our kids are 12, 13, 14, 15, we don't get that developmental guidance. And so we do go crazy as parents, and we're not sure what's okay or how to control them, if we should be controlling them. So I think for parents to be invited in, to have some of these same experiences of, let's be honest, what are you worried about right now? How is your parenting changing? And to give them some of the developmental science so they have a framework to understand what their child is going through, that can really enroll them in this whole mindset of what a school could be.